Thanks for joining us this hour. Nice to have you here. We have a special report for you tonight on a story that we've been working on for a very long time now. For going on a year and a half, we have been digging into the Russian attempt not just to interfere in this last election, but to interfere for the benefit of Russia's chosen candidate. That candidate, of course, is now the president, and his administration has been dogged since before day one by questions of whether his campaign was involved in the Russian intelligence operation that tried to influence our election. Two members of the president's campaign, including the former national security advisor, have now pled guilty to lying about their contacts with the Russians. But tonight we're going to take a step back to an intriguing and in many ways prescient document at the heart of the Trump-Russia story. We're going to step back and look at the 35-page Trump-Russia dossier. And depending on which way the news is blowing, the allegations contained in this document can sound outlandish, or they can sound freakishly spot on. Where did this dossier come from? What have we learned from it? What does it yet have to say? This is some of what we've learned.
Are there any Russians here tonight? Any Russians?
They've conducted Watergate 2.0.
Вот эти вбросы – это очевидная фальшивка.
This fake dossier was made up.
And I don't use the term dossier. These were field reports. Is there something here that I could verify?
I call it the Russian hoax. It's all fake news. I am not involved in Russia. President of the United States.
It started in the spring of 2016 with a former British spy whose name was almost too James Bond to be true. Steele, Christopher Steele.
And we will make America great again. Thank you, everybody.
If you were looking to investigate Donald Trump's alleged Russia connections, Christopher Steele would seem like the perfect fit.
He can tell you off the top of his head the leading members of the Russian mafia, people who have influence in the Kremlin and so on.
Nigel West knows Christopher Steele. He's a writer and historian whose specialty is British intelligence. West says that Steele was MI6's man in Moscow in the early 1990s.
And thereafter he ended his career as the head of the branch that trains new entry intelligence officers. And that's actually considered to be a pretty important role.
After retiring, Steele started a new company called Orbis Business Intelligence, located in this building in London. Orbis specialized in getting corporate executives deep, targeted intel on foreign countries they were dealing with. Steele's specialty was Russia.
I have listened to his presentations on what he calls the kleptocracy. This is the Putin regime and the way that it has effectively looted the former Soviet Union. And he is the go-to guy if there was anybody who wanted to conduct due diligence investigations. He knows every personality.
Jonathan Weiner is a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Law Enforcement in the Clinton administration. He says he first met Christopher Steele in Washington in 2009.
He knew more about Russian organized crime, Russian financial crime, Russian money laundering, Russian corruption than I did, and I knew quite a bit.
According to Weiner, Steele occasionally provided reports on developments inside Putin's Russia to his colleagues at the State Department.
The people who were working in Russia all the time valued the reports. They thought they were well-sourced. They felt they were remarkably timely.
The State Department wasn't the only U.S. agency to rely on Christopher Steele.
I understood he'd had a relationship with the FBI relating to the FIFA soccer scandal and had been a significant source for them in making cases in that area.
In 2016, though, the Americans calling Christopher Steele weren't FBI agents. The call he got in 2016 was from a small Washington research firm called Fusion GPS. Fusion GPS was founded by former Wall Street Journal reporters. This is how one of Fusion's founders, Glenn Simpson, described his company's mission when when he spoke at a 2009 symposium on investigative reporting at the University of California at Berkeley.
We're hoping that people who have an interest in bringing things out, do something about corruption and fraud, will come to us. They don't necessarily have to have completely pure motives. You know, frequently there's people who are in business and they're sick of competitors who cheat and they want to see things exposed. That's, you know, a sort of model for our new project.
Fusion had first been hired by a conservative website called the Washington Free Beacon. That website and its funders were opposed to Donald Trump during the Republican primaries.
I hear they're all going after me. Whatever. No, I hear it.
Once Trump appeared to clinch the nomination, those initial conservative funders at the Free Beacon lost interest in the Trump project. Soon, though, new clients agreed to pay for Fusion's research: the Democratic National Committee and the Hillary Clinton campaign.
Friends don't let friends vote for Trump.
At first, Fusion concentrated on Trump's business career, his casinos, his multiple business bankruptcies.
I've used the laws of the country to make good deals for myself.
But they soon noticed that Trump's organization seemed to do a lot of business with Russians, particularly at times when Trump's businesses might have been strapped for cash.
Trump is experiencing extreme financial difficulties. June 2008.
James Henry is an economist, lawyer, and investigative journalist who's written extensively about post-Soviet Russia and Donald Trump's Russian connections.
The only way that he survives is by calling on new sources of capital, or basically money pouring out of places like Russia and the former Soviet Union states like Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan.
There was nothing to suggest anything illegal about that, but the investigators working for Fusion GPS thought there might be more to know. So they went looking for someone who knew Russia, someone who had sources in Russia, someone like Christopher Steele.
At some point in the summer of 2016, I heard from Mr. Steele that he had this project relating to Russia, which implicated contacts between Russians and people associated with the President Trump's campaign and then candidate Trump's campaign.
Steele had barely begun his investigation of Trump's Russia ties when a very big Russia story broke in the United States. It was June 14th, 2016, and the Washington Post reported that the Democratic National Committee had been hacked. Security analysts suspected that Russia was behind it.
This was a clear espionage attempt by the Russian government to steal information about the U.S. political process.
Malcolm Nance is a former naval intelligence officer and an MSNBC contributor. He wrote a book called The Plot to Hack America about Russia's meddling in the 2016 election.
Putin views Russia as missing its place as the #1 superpower in the world, even though it's economically on par with Italy. But to do it, you can use soft power, you can use what we call hybrid warfare, which is a melange of political warfare, propaganda, ununiformed special operations, everything short of war to disable your enemy. And in the case of the United States, the easiest thing to disable is democracy, because Russia does not believe in democracy.
6 days after the Washington Post's first story on Russian hacking, Christopher Steele sent his first report to Fusion GPS. It was the very first page of the very first memo that set the tone for all of the memos and for all of the controversy that followed. Steele wrote on that first page, quote, "Russian regime has been cultivating, supporting, and assisting Trump for at least 5 years. AIM, endorsed by Putin, has been to encourage splits and divisions in Western alliance." According to Steele's unnamed sources, Trump's inner circle have accepted a regular flow of intelligence from the Kremlin. But there was also something else. Steele went on to say that Russia had enough embarrassing material on the now Republican presidential candidate to be able to blackmail him if they so wished. Steele's memo asserted that some of Russia's alleged embarrassing material on Trump had been gathered back in 2013 when Trump brought his Miss Universe pageant to Moscow.
Venezuela, Gabriela Isla, the first runner-up is Spain.
Thank you, Moscow.
That salacious claim about Trump's time in Moscow was a small part of the first Christopher Steele memo. When the full Steele dossier later became public, That claim would be the headline. But it was Steele's broader assertions about Russia's aims, Russia's methods, and Russia's relationship with Trump that would end up slow burning through the whole first year of the Trump presidency.
In 10 feet, imagine yourself as the boss, recalculating. In no time at all, realize you don't have to be the CEO to enjoy the amenities of the VIP suite. Your all-new Compass.
What do you got?
Restrained driver in a motor vehicle.
Sir, you hear me? 2, 3. Where's the cover bagging? We need a portable X-ray, please. Get the
I'm a nurse. I believe in the power of science and medicine. But I'm also human. And I believe in stacking the deck.
To nurses everywhere, thank you from Johnson & Johnson.
Tomorrow's headlines before they go to print.
I've just been handed some great reporting.
Tomorrow's questions before anyone's asked them.
Could you make an obstruction case?
I think I could.
The 11th Hour with Brian Williams. Weeknights at 11 on MSNBC.
For 20 years, Christopher Steele had kept his head down and held his secrets close to the vest. But the things he was hearing from his deep cover sources inside Russia during the summer of 2016 changed all that. According to Jonathan Weiner, Steele felt that if the Russians intended to meddle in the upcoming American election, the FBI should know about it.
That is the kind of thing the FBI needs to know and to assess professionally, impartially, in order to protect our country. That's how I felt about it. I believe that's how Mr. Steele felt about it.
In late June, with the permission of his clients at Fusion, Christopher Steele met with an old FBI contact in the UK. His intel was raw and unverified, but his concern was real.
You don't gather information like this and not pass it on to the FBI. That would be wrong. Passing on to the FBI would be the right thing to do.
The FBI had interacted with Steele before on the FIFA soccer bribery scandal and other matters. Christopher Steele was a known quantity to the Bureau, and they were interested in what he had to say about Trump and Russia. After that first meeting, the Bureau told Steele they wanted more. Steele promised to keep them in the loop. Weeks later, on July 19th, 2016, Steele sent off his second Trump memo. This was the headline: Russia, secret Kremlin meetings attended by Trump advisor Carter Page in Moscow. According to Steele's sources, those meetings involved a move to lift Ukraine-related Western sanctions against Russia. On the day that report was filed, the Republican National Convention was getting underway in Cleveland, Ohio. At the time, a few American journalists were starting to see the vague outlines of a Trump-Russia story. Trump's appointment of Paul Manafort as his campaign chair raised eyebrows because Manafort had spent years working for pro-Putin politicians.
What really started to give the Russia story some traction was Paul Manafort's role.
Michael Isikoff is a veteran investigative reporter who writes for Yahoo News. Trump had put Manafort in charge of managing the convention.
It seemed odd that the Trump campaign had this senior official who was so closely associated with a government that had become a foreign adversary.
To Isikoff, that was the first red flag.
Then the Republican convention's platform is changed to remove language that had been proposed that would offer lethal assistance to the Ukrainians who were fighting Russian intervention in their country.
From Isikoff's perspective, that was red flag number 2.
And then you had Michael Flynn, who was emerging as perhaps the chief foreign policy national security advisor to the Trump campaign.
Lock her up. That's right. That's right. Lock her up.
I interviewed Flynn that day, the afternoon of his speech. You flew over to Moscow.
Yep.
And one thing that